What is happening, everybody? So, the Hellcat. Is that car special or what? And it falls in line in a perfect spot in this modern era of performance that we're all able to enjoy right now. The reason why the Hellcat is so special is because it did for Mopar and Dodge what the Viper could never have dreamt to be able to do. The best thing about that Hellcat is it was able to ingratiate itself with the buying public. Guys and gals can understand the Hellcat. It's kind of hard to deny its impact when you see one in person, but the idea that you can walk into that dealership and see a car that you readily recognize as something you would see basically every day, but in this case it's something extremely special. But the Hellcat is not without peers, and you have to remember that it took a long time for that Hellcat to finally make it to this big horsepower party. But when it did, it came in with bells on, Jack. But keep this in mind. Before the Hellcat, in terms of hyper-performance pony cars, your choices were kind of limited. You had the 03, 04 Cobras, Termy Cobras, and those things are much loved even to this day. You can tell by the way they hold their resale value. After that, you had the GT500s, followed up by ZL1, and then, of course, walking in lockstep with those would be the CTS-Vs. All of those supercharged V8s. But Mopar had absolutely no answer for that platform whatsoever. Well, that was until 2015, some, I don't know, 11 years, 12 years after that Terminator Cobra first started laying waste to suckers on the street, Hellcat shows up. 707 horsepower. And that is a number, that magical 700 number, is a number that nobody else was able to reach, at least an American manufacturer. Yeah, I know there was the Super Snake that snuck in there at around 695 or so, and there might have been one that made a little bit more, but we're talking about cars that are readily available at any local dealership that you walk into. And that's again what made it so special. It drove people to that dealership. They wanted to see this unicorn, especially to folks that have never seen or been around cars like that. They wanted to see this thing. And the best part about that Hellcat is if you could not afford a Hellcat, well, guess what? You had plenty of options available to you. You had the Scat Pack, you had the SRT, you got the RT. And the best things about those cars is that if you couldn't afford the Hellcat, you could at least get some of that Hellcat experience. You could get the sound, you could get the look, you could get the image. And also keep this in mind, they brought back nostalgia when they were bringing out that Scat Pack. So the Hellcat, even though it doesn't really have a throwback entity, you kind of got that feeling that that was that Hemi Challenger just sitting in the corner of that showroom. Yeah, you might be buying the one with the 340, but you just wanted to hear the sales guy fire up that old beast sitting over there just to see what it was like, just to feel the rumble in the room. And that's what sold cars. I'll tell you this, when I went to go pick up my SRT, there was a sales guy walking somebody through the showroom, and the guy asked, man, can you just fire it up? I want to hear it. The sales guy was like, sure, no problem. Grabbed the keys, lit the thing off, and you'd have thought that the whole world came to a stop just for that brief moment. The whole place stopped just to hear that car light off. He piped it up a couple of times and shut it off, and then basically walked the guy back to go pick up his new truck. That's something to be said. That energy, that invigoration that it gave Mopar and Dodge, regardless of where that car falls in line in terms of power, that is a very special thing. But let's take all the romance out of this and talk about the car in and of itself. The problem with that Hellcat, even though it is and was designed to be the bully on the block, it's really not the fastest American hot rod if you compare it to a Z06. But you don't have to compare it to a Z06. It's a four-seater. And yeah, it might not be quite as quick as a Z06, but it's damn close, and it cost about 40 grand less. man, it's starting to make sense. That Hellcat's really looking good. Well, that is until you have to live with one for a while, I'm sure. Now, I don't have a Hellcat. I didn't want to have a Hellcat. The best part about a Hellcat is that it's already fast, but if you have something that's already fast, you always want more. It's that a little bit more will make it a little bit better. Well, how many little bits does it take to make a lot? Well, I don't know. A lot of guys found out with their Hellcats when those things started eating superchargers. But that'll happen when you're trying to make a 6.2 liter engine that naturally aspirated might only make about 425, 450 horsepower, makes 700 horsepower. You're going to start finding weak links. Mopar found them, corrected them, and now that car is rock solid. But you do pay a penalty for it. There's a couple of little quirks about that Hellcat that I've noticed just in listening to guys talk about them and kind of getting a general feel of them. I've driven one, but I don't have to live with one, so I'm not really talking out of turn. It's just some little things that I noticed about that car. And there's only a couple. The first one is it's heavy. It's a couple 100 pounds more than an SRT and about 300 pounds more than a Scat Pack. But all of that weight is centered right over the front tires. It is a little bit tail happy, but that doesn't really come into play unless you're really leaning on it. Which kind of brings me to my next point. When I drove the Hellcat, one of the things that became crystal clear was that it didn't feel marketably faster than my SRT. I mean, it felt faster, don't get me wrong, but it was just the way that it went about it. It's not violent, which is great, but the way that that car is geared with a 265 rear end with the automatics, it just kind of, it's not like it was slow, but it just didn't feel like 700 horsepower was underneath you. And I've run Hellcats at the track, and that's where another kind of funny thing takes place. When I run a Hellcat at the track, provided that that Hellcat is on the same tire that I'm on, if I run an 1190 in the same conditions, those Hellcats will run an 1120. It's a big difference on a drag strip, but if you tell somebody that you have an 11-second car and they're not kind of educated as to what the difference between an 11.2 and an 11.9 looks like, they just start to fall into the same category. If I tell somebody my car runs an 11-second pass, that can mean anything from an 1170 to an 1190, which it has run. But that's not to say that it's as quick or as fast as a Hellcat. That Hellcat's putting about 7 miles an hour on me on the top end. It is literally running away from me, or at least jogging away from me at the big end. There is a big performance difference from an empirical standpoint, but because it just doesn't feel like it's much faster, you don't quite get that sense of shock and awe that you would hope to get from something with that much power. Now, the little secret that you do if you've got a Hellcat is you get that 265 rear end the hell out of that car and go find you a 309 that comes in these SRTs and in the Scat Packs. Put that rear end in the car, put a drag radial on it, and that thing is nasty. So, anyway, kind of getting away from it. My thoughts on the Hellcat, I love that car for what it means to Mopar in general. I love the fact that it brought so much interest back to Mopar. Interest that, again, their top of the line Viper couldn't even muster beforehand. And with the introduction of that Hellcat, it makes Mopar, again, the bully on the block that it is supposed to be. We're talking about a manufacturer that made the Super Commando 426 when nobody else was making those types of huge power numbers back in the mid-60s. You're talking about a car company that, although it was forward-looking in many ways, missed the boat as far as pony cars and pony car Americana performance, but when it did gather its skirt back up underneath it, man, did it make it big. And that Hellcat, by the way, and the interest in the excitement that it generated for everybody that was walking in, especially looking for a challenger, anybody from a V6 to an SRT, would love to have that Hellcat, and you could still get that experience. And because it invigorated the brand so well, it paved the way for the TA or the Daytona. Don't forget, I'm not forgetting about you Chargers, don't worry, I'm just, anyway. But it paved the way for those cars as well. So if it weren't for the Hellcat, would we have the TA? Would we have the Daytona? Would the SRT be as good as it is? Would the Scat Pack be as good as it is? Man, I really don't know. But I will say this, either way, the muscle car world is a much better place to have that Hellcat in it. Post up what you guys think. Adios.